Learning a new language can be a long and complex process, but it doesn't always have to be that way. In this video, I'm going to take you through a step-by-step guide on how to learn new languages, which will hopefully simplify the process for you and make it more enjoyable. So let's get started. Okay, so step one is going to be familiarity with the sounds of the language. This is also known as phonetics, and I think it's a step that a lot of people actually overlook. They underestimate the importance and the role that phonetics plays when learning a new language. So I think that's really important to spend a bit of time at the very beginning of your language learning journey, just getting to grips with the sounds of the language and the rhythm of the language. And this is not only going to help you improve your pronunciation in the language, but it's also going to enable you to pick up words more easily spoken by native speakers, because you'll be familiar with the sounds and how they sound, how they're pronounced, and how they fit together. Because learning a language is a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle. There's kind of a lot of moving parts that need to be put together, and this can be quite overwhelming and daunting in the beginning. I'm just going to give a few examples of phonetic sounds in English that would be considered kind of unique to the English language and something that you would want to focus on if learning English as a foreign language was something you were interested in doing. Obviously, every language is going to be different, so you would want to research what those specific sounds are in your language that you're learning. So for example, diphthong sounds, things like ow in cow and oi in toy, would be something you would want to focus on, because those are unfamiliar, quite difficult sounds that not a lot of other languages have. You would also want to be focusing on things like the difference between sh and ch. Again, a lot of languages don't distinguish between those sounds, so that would be a good thing to focus on. And finally, I think it would be really valuable to look at the difference between voiced the versus unvoiced th. So things like the versus three, for example. Those are sounds that learners of English find really difficult to distinguish between, so that would be something I would also focus on. Those are just examples in English. Obviously, every language is going to be different and there is going to be some research required. I would also recommend reading aloud. That's going to be really useful, not only for pronunciation practice, but also intonation. Intonation is kind of the rhythm of a language and how it sounds, and also to do with where you put the stress in a word. Now, English is one of those languages where it's actually really difficult to know where the stress is in the word, and a lot of people end up saying things like photographer instead of photographer because they don't know where the stress is meant to go. So reading aloud is going to really help you articulate yourself in your foreign language and also help you overall with your accent pronunciation. I would also take this time to research the alphabet of your language. For example, if you're learning French and you're an English native speaker, there's no problem because they both use the Latin alphabet. However, if you are an English native speaker and you are learning Cantonese, for example, you're going to want to focus on getting to know the letters. Familiarizing yourself with the alphabet and how it's written down is also an extra step that I would add into step one before moving on to step two. Okay, so on to step two, which is going to be vocabulary. And in this section, we're going to be talking about the Pareto principle, which is also known as the 80-20 rule. And it's the idea that the most common 2,500 words actually makes up 95% of daily vocabulary that you're going to need. And I think this is quite important because people get very overwhelmed and bogged down with learning all sorts of different pieces of vocabulary, things that are actually not relevant at this stage, or actually words that are hardly used and not really relevant to common everyday language. So this is a guide on the types of words that you should be focusing on learning in the very beginning. I'm just going to run through a little list. So the first word type I think is really important to learn in your foreign language is personal pronouns. This is things like I, you, he, she, we, they. These are really important as it's going to enable you to not only talk about yourself, but also talk about other people. Next, I would suggest learning possessive pronouns. So this would be the equivalent of my, your, his, hers, etc. As it's going to enable you to go that step further and express possession. So saying this is my coat, for example. Next, we have emphatic pronouns. So things like me, you, him, her. Things like saying I go to the park with him. This is going to be really important as it's going to enable you to add detail to your sentences later on when you become more fluent in your foreign language. And it's also going to help you express yourself more fluently as well. Okay, so the fourth word type I would suggest learning are some basic prepositions. This is going to be things like at, with, on, in. And this is also going to enable you to build up those sentences, saying things like I go to the shop, for example, or I sit on the chair. Number 5 would be definite and indefinite articles. So definite articles are the in English, and indefinite articles would be a and an. And this is really important to see how this works in your foreign language. Do you have to take account of gender and number in your foreign language when expressing the equivalent of the? In languages like French, that would definitely be the case with the difference differences between le, la, les. So this is something to really bear in mind. Your foreign language might even have a third category, kind of like a neutral category. So this is the stage where you would want to be doing research when you're learning these word types. Okay, on to the next word type, which is some basic verbs. This is going to be things like to do, to go, to make, to have, to eat, to want, to see, etc. And these are really important because these are frequently used verbs, things that you're going to be using most commonly on a daily basis, things like to be able to have to, etc. And learning basic verbs in your foreign language is going to play a really important role in the next step, step 3, when we talk about grammar. And the 7th word type I would recommend you learning are some basic nouns. This is going to be things like house, apartment, the country you live in, the language you speak, family members, pets. And this is really important, as having this kind of vocabulary is going to enable you to express yourself in your foreign language, start to talk about yourself, things that are relevant to your life, and that's going to really encourage fluency later on down the line. Those would be all the noun categories that I can think of for the moment that I would suggest learning. Obviously, you could go on to learn more if you felt capable. Maybe some basic locations like cinema, restaurant, swimming pool, park could also be really useful when you're trying to explain where you're going. Okay, so on to number 8, which is learning some basic adjectives, things like colours, your nationality, maybe some positive adjectives like good, beautiful, pretty, and maybe a few negative ones like bad, ugly, disappointing. I would also add to this category emotions, so learning things like happy, sad, angry could be a really good thing to do here as well. Finally, the 9th word type I would suggest you learning are numbers, dates, and kind of anything to do with the calendar. Not only numbers in just their kind of sequential form, but also dates. How do we say things like the 29th of July, for example? In English, we've got this little TH that we add, or it's not only a TH, sometimes it's, if we're saying like the 2nd of July, it will be an ND. And we've got these little things that we add on to the numbers when we say dates. Maybe in your language, it's working slightly differently. Those are things to kind of research and bear in mind as well. Looking at how numbers are created. So in French, for 80, they actually say 4 lots of 20. 80. Now, maybe your language says it completely differently. So those are things to bear in mind. So I think days, months, years as well could be really interesting to learn before moving on to the next step. Step 3 is about learning grammar. Now, this can be a dreaded process for some people. It can put a lot of people off, but I'm here to simplify it. There is a much simpler approach that we can take that's going to enable you to learn all the grammar you need at the right stages of your language learning journey. Grammar is just there to help you. It's not there to hinder you, although it can kind of feel like that sometimes. So I would start off taking those basic verbs we mentioned in step 2 and starting to learn those in the present tense. And that's all you need to do for the moment. A lot of people actually overcomplicate this and try and start learning all the different tenses right from the get-go. And I think that's just becomes really overwhelming, and that can burn you out and almost put you off language learning, which is definitely not what we want to do. So to break that down even further, I would say start off learning the present tense of regular verbs. Regular verbs, I think, might look a little different in each language. Again, that's some research you would have to do. But if we take an example in English, it's going to be things like to eat, to want, to like, that all kind of follow the same pattern when you say I want, you want, he, she wants. Then once you've mastered that, you can move on to irregular verbs. Those are going to be things like do, make, go, where they're slightly different. And what I mean by that is when you say I go, you go, he, she goes, whereas do would be I do, you do, he, she does. So slightly different. So I would focus on those after you've mastered the regular verbs and understood the pattern in the present tense before moving on to the next stage. Then when you're ready, it's time to learn some basic syntax. So this is basically just the word order of the sentence. The word order is kind of flexible in English. It's not so flexible in other languages. So that is also something to bear in mind and research in your foreign language. Also, getting to know the word order is going to be really useful when you come to try to express yourself. You're going to be hesitating less, and this is really going to help you become more fluent. And fluency is something I'll touch on later in this video, so stay around for that. I did touch on gender earlier, but I think it's very important here that you master the agreements, gender and number, with your nouns in your foreign language, if that's relevant to your foreign language. It will be very relevant to things like Latin languages, French, Spanish, Italian, etc. For example, in English, we don't really have gender nouns that have specific genders. So for example, tree, a green tree, if we could also say green trees, and the green part, the adjective stays the same. Doesn't agree in the gender, doesn't agree in the number. Whereas in French, un arbre vert, and then if you wanted to say two green trees, deux arbres arbre vert, there would be an S on vert. And vert, there is no E on the end because arbre is masculine. That's just an example of how you have to make sure that you are not only getting the agreements in gender and number in terms of speaking, but also that you're making sure you're mastering those written down as well. And finally, this is an advanced grammar step, so don't worry if you're not at this stage. This can come much, much later. But in case you're already on a language learning journey and you feel that you're in between beginner and intermediate, this could be a good thing to explore. And that is direct and indirect objects. So which verbs take direct objects and which verbs take indirect objects. For example, if I give you a difference between direct and indirect objects in English and French. In English we say I ask him, whereas in French they say the equivalent of I ask to him, je lui demande. So that is just a difference where the same verb in one language takes a direct object, but in another language takes an indirect object. And again, that's something you're going to have to just learn specific to your foreign language. But don't worry if that's too complicated at this stage, because that can come later when you're more of an intermediate level. Step 4 is all about making simple sentences. So this is putting together what we have learned in step 2 with vocabulary and step 3 with grammar to form some basic sentences. And I'm going to show you how we can do that. I'm going to talk to you about a game that can really help you build simple sentences in your foreign language. So for example, if we have the sentence, I go to the shops in your foreign language, you're going to write that down and you're going to choose one word to replace with a picture. So let's say shops. So you write down I go to the in your foreign language, and then instead of writing shops in the foreign language, you're going to replace that with a picture of a shop. And then you're going to read the sentence and you're going to recall from your memory the word shop in your foreign language. Then after that, you would replace another word. So let's say go. So you would write I and then draw a picture of a go, to the, and then draw a picture of a shops. So you've got 2 pictures and 2 words to remember. And you keep doing that until the whole sentence is just pictures. And after that, you slowly start taking the pictures away, so there's just gaps, so you haven't got the picture to jog your memory. And eventually you can remember the sentence, you can recall the sentence from your brain without actually having anything written down. Now, this is a slow process. It would obviously take you some time to get to that level, but the picture association game is definitely a really good exercise. It helps with active recall, which is something a lot of people struggle with when learning a foreign language. And it's really important you prioritize speaking from the very beginning. I think a lot of people spend time just studying the language and taking it all in. And while I think there is a place for doing that, I would definitely encourage active speaking. Even if you're making mistakes, even if you're stuttering or hesitating, just speaking from the very beginning is going to be the best thing you can do. So once you have mastered saying simple sentences, you can start building them to be more complex with the other word types that we learned earlier. So you can add things like prepositions, locations, adjectives. You could say, I go to the shops with my friend, or I play tennis with my dad, for example. Okay, so on to step 5. This is going to be learning common everyday expressions in your foreign language. Now, what I mean by that are expressions which are used every day, which are not formed in the same way in your native language. So I'm going to give you an example. In English, we say my name is, whereas in French, they literally say I call myself, je m'appelle. So this is proof that translating word by word, I think we all know, is definitely a really bad way of learning languages. Just getting familiar with these kind of expressions. I'll give you another one. In English, we express age with the verb to be. I am 24, for example. Whereas in other languages like French and Spanish, they express age with the verb to have. So in French, it would be j'ai 24 ans. And not je suis 24 ans. And those are really important things to learn. There will be quite a few expressions that use completely different verbs or are said in a completely different way. And I think it's important that you get familiar with those so that you can start sounding like a native speaker. I think these everyday expressions are really important to learn. And obviously the common expressions and the verbs used and the way that they are made up is going to be different depending on the foreign language. So this is kind of general advice. These expressions that are maybe different to your native language are going to be really important to learn how to express age, how to express dates, how to express where you live. Is the word order completely different in your foreign language? Maybe it doesn't start with a pronoun I or you. Maybe they start with a verb. I know in Spanish that can be the case. So I would definitely spend some time trying to learn the most common expressions and how they're formed, because I think that would be really helpful when trying to strike up a conversation and express yourself in the very beginning of your language journey. Now, step 6 is about comprehension. Obviously, you're going to be doing some comprehension in the other steps too. But what I mean by comprehension is really starting to understand understand different forms of media in your foreign language, and we're going to talk about that now. So if we take the example of how children learn languages, just their native language, this can be really helpful in the principles that we apply to learning a foreign language. So children's language and the way we speak to children is we often speak slower and we use simple vocabulary so that they can understand. And this is exactly the type of technique you need to employ when learning a foreign language. So I would start off by watching kids' TV shows, things like Peppa Pig. That's what I started with when I was learning French, because it's going to be simple vocabulary, very simple sentences, and easy to understand storyline. Even better if you can find a show that you already know the storyline to. So Peppa Pig, I watched so much of that when I was a child. So I kind of know all the stories and the characters, because you don't want to add a layer of complexity where you don't know the characters and you don't really know what's happening in the storyline. You want something that you're already familiar with. And you're going to start picking out words, just singular words, maybe the word blue, or maybe the word hello even. It could just be as simple as hello or thank you, or something like that. It's going to be very, very basic at the beginning, because comprehension is quite an overwhelming thing, especially when people start talking in full sentences and you've just been used to studying little expressions, saying little phrases. It can suddenly become really daunting. So I would also use the subtitles in your native language to begin with, so that you can kind of get the gist of what's going on and pick out singular words. Once that becomes too easy, you then want to switch the subtitles to the foreign language, so you're effectively reading what you're hearing. And that's going to be really useful, because there'll be many, many words that you'll miss, and you can look down and read them and be like, oh yeah, that's that word, and get used to hearing those words that maybe you've only seen written down and you're not used to hearing them. That's where the step one in the getting familiar with the phonetics is going to really play its role, because a lot of people struggle with recognizing words when they're spoken, but when they're written down, it's quite easy to know what they are. So your work on phonology in your foreign language in the beginning is going to really help you at this stage when picking up words in the show. Once you can easily understand everything going on in the kids show with the subtitles in the foreign language, I would suggest taking those away. That's also going to be a big step, because the subtitles, even in the foreign language, are a comfort blanket that I know I used for a long time with French. And as soon as I took them away, I kind of panicked. I couldn't understand anything that anyone was saying. So yes, it's going to be a transition taking away those subtitles, but if you start with the kids shows, it shouldn't be too much of a shock, something that will just take a little bit of time to get used to. And eventually, when that becomes too easy, you're going to move on to YouTube videos. Now, I suggest YouTube videos because they are easier to understand than dialogue in movies and series, mainly because you haven't got a storyline to worry about, you haven't got multiple characters to worry about in a YouTube video, and a YouTube video is someone talking to you, so the vocabulary and sentences tend to be simplified and easier to understand. So I would suggest finding some YouTubers in your foreign language, in the niches that you're interested in. So if you're interested in makeup, find some beauty YouTubers in your foreign language. If you're interested in computing, find some computing YouTubers in your foreign language. There are YouTubers in every single language, in nearly every single niche around the world. So that shouldn't be too much of a problem. And start watching their videos and go through this subtitle process again. Firstly, putting it in your native language, if there's the possibility. I think there are auto captions on YouTube, so you should be able to do that. Then changing it to the foreign language, and then eventually taking it away. And once you've graduated from YouTube videos, you can start watching Netflix series and films and documentaries in your foreign language and repeating the subtitle process again. This is going to be the hardest step. I wouldn't expect you to be able to understand movies and series dialogue in your foreign language until you're at least intermediate level and you've had quite a few months of practice. It's really something that's not easy. And if you end up watching series and movies with the subtitles in your foreign language for quite a long time and you're kind of stuck on that step, don't worry, that's quite normal. It's very, very difficult. You've got to the advanced stage. If you can take off those subtitles in your foreign language and watch movies and series without anything at all to help you, that's when you know that you have really become fluent in your foreign language in terms of the comprehension side. Step 7 is all about conversational fluency, and I feel like this is something a lot of people are really interested in, finding out how to become more fluent in a foreign language. And it's not an easy task. There's also no magic key, but I'm just going to give you a few tips that can help you become more fluent in your foreign language over time. So the first tip is focusing on language production, where you want to be heavily focusing on producing the language. Active skills are the speaking and the writing. Passive skills are the reading and the listening. And the passive skills tend to be the easier ones, the ones that come first. And people find it very difficult to improve their active skills because producing language is really difficult and takes a lot of time. So you will probably all be familiar with the bias to action concept, where you're favoring doing the action rather than lots of planning and just thinking about it and never actually doing it. Here we want to be biasing language production. So actually prioritizing on a daily basis speaking the language. You shouldn't go a day really without trying to produce some sentences or some phrases or some words, depending on what level you're at. And it's going to be messy, it's going to feel awkward, it's going to be hard, there's going to be lots of pauses, lots of hesitations, but that's normal. We've all been there, and you just have to keep pushing through if you want to become fluent. So that would be my first tip. My second tip would be the imitation technique. Using the shows that you're watching or the YouTube videos that you're watching, depending on what level you're at, and trying to imitate what they're saying. So if you hear a phrase and you've understood the phrase, put it on pause and try to repeat the phrase. You could even wind it back and have another go. And even if you're at the very beginning of your language journey and you're just a beginner, you can also do that in your kids' shows. If you hear the word house in your foreign language, put it on pause and repeat the word house. And imitation, again, is going back to this idea of using the same techniques that children use when they're learning languages for the first time in their life. They imitate adults. They repeat words that adults say, and that's exactly what you're going to be doing to progress in your foreign language. Another really important thing for improving conversational fluency is role play. This is a bit harder if you're on your own practicing your foreign language and you don't really have anybody to help you. But if you can find someone in your city that speaks that foreign language, is a native speaker or a fluent speaker of that foreign language, that's a great way not only to practice languages but also to make friends. Equally, if you have a tutor in the language, they can be a really good person to practice conversations with. If you don't have anyone, there are YouTube videos. People have made videos in all sorts of different languages where they say a line and then the line that you're supposed to say comes up on the screen for you to read. And it creates this kind of dialogue. So you get to practice conversations even if it's not in real life. And if you would like to practice English or French, I'll leave a link down below where you can book a lesson with me. And lastly, to improve conversational fluency, I would recommend trying to think in your foreign language on a daily basis. Now, I don't mean right from the start your internal monologue is entirely in the foreign language. Just start little by little. Even if you have to use post-it notes, put a post-it note on your chair that says the word chair in your foreign language. So every time you sit down on your chair, you see that word. And you're kind of giving yourself the opportunity to have daily contact with the language. So you're not only just going to read the word chair, but you're going to say it out loud as you're sitting on it. And it's the idea that part of fluency is actually stopping translating everything in your head from your native language into your foreign language and actually thinking directly in your foreign language. So rather than thinking, oh yeah, that's a chair in French, c'est une chaise, you think when you see a chair, you kind of skip the fact that it's called a chair and you know that thing as a chaise. If I give an example in English, the word déjà vu, we have that in English, and people know what that is. It's this concept of you think you've seen something before, but you actually haven't. It's just your mind playing tricks on you. Now, people don't go around going déjà vu, oh yeah, that means that you think you've seen it before. When you say the word déjà vu, people actually know what it is. They associate it with a concept. And this is what you're trying to do in your foreign language. You're trying as best as you can to associate words and phrases with concepts and things in life rather than with your native language, if that makes sense. And that will help you over time slowly let go of this always having to translate in your head first, which really slows down and hinders fluency in a foreign language. So little by little, start with post-it notes. You can then move on to actually saying specific tasks. So saying out loud to yourself in your foreign language, now I'm going to do the washing up. Or if you've just learned the past tense, you could say, I've just had a shower. It's kind of crazy to talk to yourself out loud, but that's exactly what you need when you're learning a foreign language. You need to be using the language, speaking it out loud. Even if you've got a bad accent, don't worry about that. That will come later. Just as much daily contact with the foreign language as possible is going to be really, really beneficial for your language learning journey. Okay, so on to step 8. This is going to be improving your writing. Now, writing, as I said earlier, is an active skill that is difficult to produce in a foreign language, and it does take some work and some time. So this would be probably slightly later in your language learning journey, and once you've got familiar with the other steps and comfortable with the other skills. So just like I suggested for speaking, we want to start off with easy to read short text. So just like the kids shows, we're going to be focusing on reading children's books. They have easy sentences, simple sentences, easy to understand vocabulary, and easy to understand storylines and characters. If you can find a children's book that's been translated into your foreign language, a book that you already know, great. If no books that you read as a child are available in your foreign language, never mind. It's not the end of the world if you don't actually know the storyline to the children's book. Seeing if you can pick out the grammar that you've already learned, the word order of the sentence. Ah, yes, I've seen that in my grammar studies. That's how that's working. So when you're reading the short stories, you want to be underlining words that you do know, underlining words that you don't know. And before you search up those words that you don't know in your foreign language, you want to try and use the context around those words that you don't know in the sentence to see if you can guess what they mean. Often we can guess what words mean just from the context around them in the sentence. So I would suggest doing that first before going straight to the dictionary and searching up what they actually mean. And that's also a really good task, consolidating what you've already learned and starting to critically think in your foreign language, which I think is something that's really important as well. And not just relying on soaking everything up. Rather than going straight to the dictionary, you actually try and have a guess. Maybe you'll be wrong, maybe you'll be right. But it's a good exercise to put into practice all the language learning knowledge that you've acquired so far. So with the children's books, you're going to be observing how sentences are written. And this is going to be really important because you're going to, at some point, start writing your own little short story, your own children's book. And this is about imitating written language, and when you feel ready, switching out words to make it your own. So let's say in the children's book, it says, I play with my brother Tim. Now you can repeat that sentence and write it down. And instead of brother, you could change it for sister, or you could change the name Tim to the name of your brother, or you could even change the number and say, I play with my 2 brothers, for example. And again, this is about observing how language is written because it's not the same as spoken language. It's a little more formal, even in children's books, and trying to replicate that and get familiar with how you express yourself in written form in your foreign language. Then once children's books become too easy, you can move on to adult books. Non-fiction reading is also really good. Things like news articles, magazine articles, diary entries are also really good. And I would recommend, once you get to the stage where you are comfortable writing simple sentences, try writing a diary entry. Now you can have the model diary entry on the side, so you can just be copying parts and just changing it, changing details to match your own life. And eventually, once you get comfortable writing a diary entry from the model answer, you can take the model answer away and actually start really producing sentences on your own without the guide there to help you. And the reason I recommend a diary entry is because I think it's a lot easier to produce language when you're talking about personal experiences that you've lived. It's really difficult to produce language about things that you don't really have a lot of knowledge on, or things that you've never experienced before. Start with trying to produce language that's relevant to you, relevant to your day. And then once that becomes easy to write diary entries and little stories, you could start trying to write non-fiction text, which is a little harder. Things like a news article. Could you write a little news article on a subject? It could be just made up, or it could be inspired from a news article in your native language. But those are things that would come later, and writing is a skill that will be picked up over time just by reading lots of different texts and trying to imitate them and adapt them to your personal experiences. And eventually over time you will feel more confident producing language and taking away and being less reliant on model answers. Finally, we've reached the last step, step 9, which is about studying more advanced grammar. Now this is going to be a long way down the line, so you don't have to worry about this for a while. But once you have learned the basic grammar of regular verbs and irregular verbs in the present tense, you can start adding things like the past tense, the future tense, the conditional tense, and to go even further, things like compound tenses. So that would be things like I would have done this. If clauses, so if only I had got more sleep, I wouldn't be so tired, which are going to be really interesting to learn in your foreign language. We can also talk about moods. So there are different moods. If you don't know what that means, don't worry, that's quite complicated. Things like the imperative. So do your homework. The way that do is expressed in the imperative form in other languages is often different. In English, it just stays as do, but in other languages, it's a lot harder. So that would be something to look into as well. There's also the subjunctive. I won't go into what that is now, but I'll put a little definition on the screen for those that are interested. But if all that sounds too difficult, then you could even just start with things like learning how to form questions in your foreign language. That's something that's often overlooked and is actually quite difficult to do. So forming questions, expressing opinions, and things like that I would start off with. Then move on to different tenses, so past, future, conditional, then your compound tenses, then your moods. And I talked earlier about direct and indirect objects as well. I think that's everything for this video. Language learning should be fun, and should be a daily task. So you don't want to make it a chore, you want to try and make it as fun as possible. So watching shows that you actually enjoy when you get to that level, you know, listening to the radio, listening to songs in your foreign language. If you incorporate your foreign language into your daily life rather than fitting your daily life around learning a foreign language, I think you'll find it a lot more enjoyable. You'll be in the habit of practicing a lot more, you'll be wanting to speak a lot more, and overall language learning is a hard process. That's something that we do have to accept, that it is slow progress and it takes time. You'd actually be surprised how much progress you can make in 3 months if you incorporate a little bit of language learning into your everyday life for the next 12 weeks. I'd say consistency and immersion are going to be the key to fluency. So consistency is going to be speaking and having daily contact with the language. Immersion is going to be trying to immerse yourself with people that speak those languages as best as you can. So if you can't meet up with people in real life or have a teacher that speaks that language, then try as best as you can to engage with these videos that help you practice your conversational fluency, or try to find people online. There are a lot of people online that are searching for language partners, so that could also be a really good way to find someone to practice with as well. So good luck with learning your foreign language. I hope this video has been helpful. Let me know in the comments what stage of learning your foreign language you are at, and any videos you would like to see in the future. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.